Thank you for coming to my class and being a part of it this whole time. This class tonight will be my last class before I go to Ukraine. So next Wednesday, Dr. David Greder will be taking the class over, and you'll get the rest of different stories of Genesis through him. So I guess these are the last two classes of Genesis 1 through 11. Dr. Greder's going to get the Tower of Babel for us. So we're going to try to get through as much as Genesis as we can tonight. So we're going to pick off kind of where we left off in chapter 6, and then through chapter 9 is the goal for tonight. So starting in verse 5, we got to this at the very last 2 minutes of class, so we probably don't remember much of it. So we're going to kind of do a little recap of the last minute or so. So this is verse 5 of chapter 6. Then the Lord saw that the wickedness of man was great on the earth, that every intent of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. The Lord was sorry that he had made man on the earth, and he was grieved in his heart. The Lord said, I will blot out man, whom I have created from the face of the land, from man to animals to creeping things and to birds of the sky. For I am sorry that I have made them. But Noah found favor in the eyes of the Lord. So it's really the first time in the biblical text that we see God show a pretty obvious emotion. Even when Adam and Eve sinned, we don't really get much of a hint at what God was feeling. But here in this text, we get really strong emotions out of God of grief. And those of you who have grieved before, you know what that is like. It's really burdensome on the soul. And that's at least the word that's translated here for God is that God was grieving over how evil the world had become. And it had gotten so bad to where it says that each man's heart, each thought was only evil continually. So, even though I guess the goal of every generation maybe of people is to say that the generation that came after them is worse than their generation, it feels like we're still not at this point in our society today. No matter how many evil things you see in society today, this is just unprecedented evil. But what's interesting is that when we kind of go through this account, really the only thing that God points out and that he really magnifies is how violent the earth had become. That's the only sin that we're really given a picture of that God focuses on, which is kind of interesting. I'm not really sure why that is, but that seems to be what God is the most upset about. I assume that there's just a lot of violence in the earth and that there's no real consequences for this violence. The violence seems to be very unchecked. But there is a man by the name of Noah, and Noah finds favor in the eyes of the Lord. Or grace, but maybe the translation that you're using might say that. So we'll go on and talk about Noah a little bit. But one thing that says about Noah in verse 9, these are the records of the generations of Noah. Noah was a righteous man. He was blameless in his time. Noah walked with God. Noah became the father of 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. So we have some language about Noah that should be familiar to us. It says that Noah walked with God. Who does that remind us of? It reminds us of Enoch, right? Enoch walked with God, and he was not, for God took him. Enoch didn't experience death. And in the same way, Noah is not going to experience death in one way. Noah is going to, because he's walking with God, right? Noah is going to escape judgment. He's not going to escape death, per se, but he is going to escape God's judgment and God's wrath. So, this word that it talks about Noah says, Noah was blameless in his generation. I want to go to Deuteronomy chapter 18 real quick, because this is a term that would have been familiar to the Israelites. And Moses uses it in Deuteronomy, starting in verse 12. For whoever does these things is detestable to the Lord. Because of these detestable things, the Lord your God will drive them out before you. You shall be blameless before the Lord your God. For those nations which you shall dispossess, listen to those who practice witchcraft and to diviners. But as for you, the Lord your God has not allowed you to do so. So this term that's used in reference to Noah, blamelessness, Moses uses that and he adapts that to talk about the difference and the distinction of Israel from the nations that surrounded, the nations that they were going into. And these people were a violent people, but most of all, they were people of idolatry. They were people who are practicing witchcraft. So we don't really know if this generation is like, if they're connected in that way. It's possible, but the only thing that we really get from the text is that it was a very violent generation, and they were corrupt. But I just wanted to bring that connection together, if there is possibly one. So verse 11, now the earth was corrupt in the sight of God. The earth was filled with violence. God looked on the earth, and behold, it was corrupt, for all flesh had corrupted their way upon the earth. So then God announces to Noah the plan. The end of all flesh has come before me, for the earth is filled with violence because of them. Behold, I'm about to destroy them with the earth. Make for yourself an ark of gopher wood. You shall make the ark with rooms. You shall cover it inside and out with pitch. This is how you shall make it. The length of the ark 300 cubits, its breadth 50 cubits, its height 30 cubits. You shall make a window for the ark and finish it a cubit from the top and set the door of the ark in the side of it. You shall make it with lower, second, and third decks. Behold, I, even I, am bringing the flood of water upon the earth to destroy all flesh, and which is the breath of life. From under heaven, everything that is on the earth shall perish. But I will establish my covenant with you. You shall enter the ark, you and your sons, and your wife, and your sons' wives with you. So let's look at some kind of terms of importance in this section. So, are some things. Genesis makes it really clear, especially in this section about the flood, and its commentary on the heart of man. Right? We got in verse 5 that the thoughts of man's heart were evil continually. But after the flood, as things are kind of subsiding and the waters are lowering, in chapter 8, verse 21, God says this about the human heart. Or after Noah has offered sacrifices to him, so they're off the ark at this point, God says, I'll never again curse the ground on account of man, for the intent of man's heart is evil from his youth. I will never again destroy every living thing as I have done. And so this is going to, the reason the biblical text starts this way and has this commentary on man's heart, that man's heart is inclined to becoming corrupt. And so that's going to become a very important theme later on when the prophet Ezekiel comes into the picture, and he prophesies in Ezekiel 36 that man's heart is like stone and it needs to be remade by God. It needs to become a heart of flesh, and God is going to put his spirit within man so that man can have a heart that desires God. So that's an important theme that we see first started here, is that man's heart is easily corrupted. We're also going to start to be introduced to the term flesh. And flesh is used about 13 times from about chapter 6 to chapter 9. So it's starting to be very prevalent. It's not just in reference to human nature or humans. It's also used in reference to the animals and man. Or sometimes it's just man, sometimes it's just animals. That term flesh is used perhaps to show that these are mortal creatures. God is bringing his judgment against his creation because his whole creation has been affected by this sin. So, and then more importantly, we have the first occurrence of the term covenant in Genesis. And as you know, this is going to be extremely important as we continue to go on with the story of Genesis. We have Abraham next, God's covenant with him. We have God's covenant with Jacob, who becomes Israel. And covenant is just an important concept as you go throughout the Old Testament and even into the New. And this is the first occurrence of it, is God's covenant with Noah. And of course, we kind of know what a covenant is. A covenant's like an alliance or a friendship. In this case, it's between the man Noah and God. But covenants differ, and the biblical text is full of them. There's marriage covenants. There's covenants between kings and people. There's covenants between kings and kings. And what's interesting about some of these covenants that we're going to encounter is that some covenants are a promise that requires an act of obedience. So the first covenant, God promises that he's going to bring this flood, but he is going to save Noah's family. But what does Noah have to do to be saved from the flood? He has to spend his time building an ark, right? So that covenant agreement requires action on the part of Noah. But there are some covenants that do not require anything on the part of man. And so we're going to see even some of those commandments as well. And that's kind of what we've already seen in chapter 8, verse 21. God, after the flood, realizes that man's heart is going to be wicked anyway. But despite this fact, God says, I'm still not going to send a flood again to destroy the earth. So no matter how bad man's wickedness, if it returns and gets as bad as it was, God's still not going to go back on his promise that he's not going to destroy the earth again like he did during the flood. So there are some covenants that don't require necessarily an act of obedience. They're just a promise from God. So we have a mix. I wanted to go a little bit into Noah's character in the New Testament because we do get some extra insight into his character, and he is an important character in the New Testament as well. And go to Hebrews 11 real quick with me, if you would. We start in verse 5. By faith Enoch was taken up so that he would not see death, and he was not found because God took him up. For he obtained the witness that before his being taken up, he was pleasing to God. Without faith, it is impossible to please him. For he who comes to God must believe that he is a rewarder of those who seek him. By faith Noah, being warned by God about things not yet seen, in reverence prepared an ark for the salvation of his household, by which he condemned the world and became an heir of the righteousness which is according to faith. So what the Hebrews writer does is, Hebrews 11:6, that gives us a depiction of how to please God through faith, is that he sandwiches the story of Enoch and Noah right between that statement in chapter 11, verse 6. And the message is that righteousness comes through faith. And it's also the first time we see righteousness. That term is in Genesis 6. And it refers to Noah. But that righteousness comes through a faith that is willing to seek God out in a relationship. It's not necessarily mean that that person is, sinless, of course. We know that man is sinful, man makes mistakes. But if you seek God out and you seek that relationship in faith, God is going to seek you out. So Noah is called an heir of righteousness. Hebrews 11, verse 7. Also, Peter, when he's talking to the church who is undergoing persecution from false teachers, he uses Noah as an example of someone who preached and proclaimed righteousness and suffered because of it. And so Noah becomes an example of perseverance under suffering and the importance of suffering for the right thing opposed to the wrong thing. So that's 2 Peter 2, verse 5. Also, this story of the flood, it comes a little bit of a full circle in the story of Jesus as well. In 1 Peter 3, 19 through 20, and the flood becomes an important symbol in the New Testament and also the ark. Let's go to 1 Peter 3 real quick. And this is a pretty difficult passage, so we're not going to go too much in depth about what's said. We're just going to kind of take it at its face value. Let's look at verse 18. For Christ also died for sins once for all, the just for the unjust, so that he might bring us to God, having been put to death in flesh, but made alive in the Spirit, in which he also went and made proclamation to the spirits now in prison, who were once disobedient when the patience of God kept waiting in the days of Noah, during the construction of the ark, in which a few, that is 8 persons, were brought safely through the water. Corresponding to that, baptism now saves you, not the removal of dirt from the flesh, but an appeal to God for a good conscience through the resurrection of Jesus. So this symbol of being saved from this catastrophic event, this judgment of God, becomes the symbol of the church for Christian baptism. And so we get very early on this idea in Genesis of new life coming through death, or a judgment scene like this. So that's another interesting thing that Noah and his story is used for in the New Testament. Also, Jesus quotes the story of Noah, Matthew 24, when he's talking about the coming of the Son of Man. And he talks about how during Noah's day, there was people given in marriage and partying, and they didn't know that their judgment was coming soon. And he's like, in the same way will be the coming of the Son of Man. People will not be expecting it. And so this New Testament theme of Jesus returning and you need to be ready, really the basis of that all comes from this passage and about Noah and being ready, because we're not told that Noah was ever given a date on when this was going to happen. He collects the animals, he cares for them, and he also is building the ark. And then finally the day comes and they go into the ark. So let's go to Genesis 7 real quick, point out a couple of things. So verse 1, the Lord said to Noah, enter the ark, you and all your household, for you I have seen to be righteous before me in this time. So we kind of have the acknowledgement there. Because of Noah's faith and him faithfully building this ark and doing all that God had commanded him to do, God has seen Noah and acknowledged him as being righteous to the covenant. And so because Noah's been righteous to the covenant, God is going to fulfill what he promised. Now, one thing that you'll see in the text is that Noah's family is never talked about like Noah is. It doesn't say that Noah's wife was blameless or his children. It doesn't talk about their righteousness. And I guess it doesn't mean that they were or they weren't. But it's just every time you see it in the text, it's talking about Noah specifically as an individual. So another thing that's kind of interesting about Genesis 7 is we have the first distinction of animals on clean or unclean. We're not told at this point what they are, but the audience of this book would have understood that. They would have known. And so we can kind of see that it's written retrospectively for the Jewish people, and so they would have known what the clean animals were and who they weren't. So there's 7 pairs of every clean animal to go on the ark and 1 pair of every unclean animal. So once the flood begins, the rains go for 40 days and 40 nights, and we kind of have this going full circle back to the beginning of creation. We talked about in Genesis 1 verse 2, how the earth was dark, it was void, and there was just water over the surface of everything. There was no land. And it was this imagery of chaos and disorder. Well, God is bringing that back in this judgment. Is that waters are going to cover everything, even the highest peaks of mountains. And the waters are just going to keep rising. And the fountains of the deep are opened. So you have this judgment that comes from the ground. You have the judgment of the rain that comes from heaven. And so it's just water saturates everything. It's just kind of, you get this picture of the fullness of God's judgment. So we talked about it exceeded over the peaks of the highest mountains. And it's not until Genesis 8 till things start to subside. Verse 1 says, God remembered Noah and all the beasts and the cattle that were with him in the ark. God caused a wind to pass over the earth, and the waters started to subside. So where Noah's ark ends up landing is in a mountain range, which in modern day is eastern Turkey. And so it rests in the mountain range of Ararat. The peaks of Ararat are around 14,000 feet, so similar to some of our tallest mountains in America. So these would be bald mountains with snow on top. But we're not really sure where Noah's ark rested, right? It's in a range of that mountain range. But I found out some interesting information about this mountain range is actually from about 5,000 to 10,000 feet are on this mountain range. The shepherds of that area, there's really good pasture for their sheep in those areas. So it's still used today. And I thought, that'd be kind of convenient for, Noah comes out of the ark, once things have, it's not muddy and as mucky anymore, and he has these, this good land to basically pasture, these animals that have just come out of the ark. So it's not like a wasteland or anything like that. Also around the area, they found some stones that they believe to be, some people believe that they're possibly anchors for the ark. And there's kind of some interesting study on that. But everything finally, the standing water dries up, and it is New Year's Day. It's the first month of the first year. So Happy New Year. They finally can get out of that stinky ark. And then they just kind of got to wait for things to not be muddy anymore. And so if you noticed in this this picture, when we're talking about, Adam's role, is that we're supposed to kind of connect in our minds the similarities between Noah and Adam here, right? Noah has all these animals come to him, and he's supposed to tend to them. He's supposed to care for them. And so we kind of get this picture of the Garden of Eden. And of course, the ark in the midst of this flood is a paradise. It's the only place that can support life. But the thing about this is that we're not going back to the Garden of Eden. And that's what Noah finds out once he goes back. Once the ark opens and he's there. So and then verse 8, verse 21, we have an example of a covenant that does not necessarily require obedience. Okay, then to Genesis 9. So Noah has been successful. God's fulfilled his promise to Noah that he would save him. And then we have the same proclamation that was given to Adam and Eve. Go forward, be fruitful, and multiply, is the same thing that he says to Noah here. But not everything is the same. This isn't going to be a new Eden. And we kind of already know that because God's already come to the conclusion that man's heart is the issue, the root of the issue of all this. So God says in verse 1, God blessed Noah and his sons and said to them, be fruitful and multiply, fill the earth. The fear of you and the terror of you will be on every beast of the earth and on every bird of the sky, with everything that creeps on the ground and all the fish of the sea. Into your hand they are given. Every moving thing that is alive shall be food for you. I give all to you as I gave the green plant. Only you shall not eat flesh with its life, that is its blood. Surely I will require your lifeblood from every beast. I will require it. From every man's brother, I will require the life of man. Whoever sheds man's blood, by man his blood shall be shed. For in the image of God he made man. As for you, be fruitful and multiply. Populate the earth abundantly and multiply in it. So, besides the be fruitful and multiply, there are some differences here. Is this new covenant that God is giving to Noah is going to allow him to actually eat these animals. Whereas before, there hasn't been a record of that. So apparently man just ate, the plants like he did in the garden. But now man's going to be allowed to eat animals. And the animals, instead of being under his dominion, they're going to be afraid of him and scared of him. So he will have to hunt them if he wants them. So that's kind of an interesting development. And we still kind of see the separation and the movement away from the ideal garden scenario. So another thing that God's doing with this covenant, and you can see it here in verse 6, is that God is making clear that human life, and just really life in general, is sacred. And it should be cared for. Blood shouldn't be spilled with impunity like it was before the flood. So God is trying to, put an end to this violence in this new world as we're trying to get this in a sense, a fresh restart. And so it's the first time we kind of hear about capital punishment here. Whoever sheds man's blood, by man his blood shall be shed. And the reason why man is still precious is because he's still made in the image of God. Even after mankind's heart had become fully corrupt, we are still in his image. And we talked about that, how when Adam sinned and Adam and Eve had Seth, Seth was still made in the image of God. So despite our efforts to corrupt that image, we're still made in his image, and we don't lose that. So this covenant is a covenant of peace. It's not based on man's faithfulness, especially when we get to the rainbow. So let's read that part. Verse 8. Then God spoke to Noah and to his sons with him, saying, Now behold, I myself do establish my covenant with you, and with your descendants after you, with every living creature that is with you, the birds, the cattle, every beast of the earth with you, of all that comes out of the ark, even every beast of the earth. I establish my covenant with you, and all flesh shall never again be cut off by the water of the flood, neither shall there again be a flood to destroy the earth. God said, This is the sign of the covenant which I'm making between me and you and every living creature that is with you for all successive generations. I set my bow in the cloud, and it shall be for a sign of a covenant between me and the earth. It shall come about when I bring a cloud over the earth, that the bow will be seen in the clouds. I'll remember my covenant, which is between me and you and every living creature of all flesh, and never again shall the water become a flood to destroy all flesh. So there we go. We have this covenant of peace. It's all on God's part. No matter how evil man gets, this kind of event is not going to happen again, at least by means of water. This covenant of peace that we have, there's a link later on with a prophecy of Isaiah, and it's the chapter following the messianic prophecies of Jesus in Isaiah 53. So let's go to Isaiah 54 together, and we'll see kind of how Noah ties in with this as well. We're going to start in verse 4. So this is regards to God's people Israel. Fear not, for you will not be put to shame. Do not feel humiliated, for you will not be disgraced. But you will forget the shame of your youth, and the reproach of your widowhood you will remember no more. For your husband is your maker, whose name is the Lord of hosts. Your Redeemer is the Holy One of Israel, who is called the God of all the earth. For the Lord has called you like a wife forsaken and grieved in spirit, even like a wife of one's youth when she is rejected, says your God. For a brief moment I forsook you, but with great compassion I will gather you. In an outburst of anger I hid my face from you for a moment, but with everlasting loving kindness I will have compassion on you, says the Lord your Redeemer. For this is like the days of Noah to me, when I swore that the waters of Noah would not flood the earth again. So I've sworn that I will not be angry with you, nor will I rebuke you. For the mountains may be removed and the hills may shake, but my loving kindness will not be removed from you, and my covenant of peace will not be shaken, says the Lord who has compassion on you. So this covenant that Noah is getting and all of creation is getting, that doesn't require their obedience, and it's going to be a promise in their disobedience. When the prophet Isaiah is talking to God's people in chapter 54, and right after we've talked about the promise of the Messiah that's coming, God says, this is like the days of Noah to me. And so he's setting forward, he's like, I'm going to make a covenant with you, and this is the covenant, that my loving kindness will not be removed from you, and my covenant of peace will not be shaken, says the Lord who has compassion on you. The promise is that God's going to redeem his people, God's going to be compassionate, and God's going to continue in loving kindness to his people, just like the covenant he made with Noah. He's not going to break that. And then at the very end, verse 17, we see who this is directed to. No weapon that's formed against you will prosper. Every tongue that accuses you in judgment will condemn. That is the heritage of the servants of the Lord. This covenant is for those, it's not necessarily just Israel as a nation, but more specifically, it is for those who've set their hearts to be servants of Yahweh, the Lord God. So, and there's many other, covenants in the Old Testament and the New Testament, but I like this one for its connection and how Noah helps us understand, and God uses Noah as an example of that covenant for things that are still yet to happen for Israel, that now we have experienced through Jesus Christ. So, now that they're out of the ark, we have the first conflict pretty soon into it. So let's read on that. So Noah began farming and planted a vineyard. He drank of the wine, became drunk, and uncovered himself inside his tent. Ham, the father of Canaan, saw the nakedness of his father, told his two brothers outside. But Shem and Japheth took a garment, laid it upon both their shoulders, walked backward, covered the nakedness of their father. Their faces were turned away, so they did not see their father's nakedness. When Noah awoke from his wine, he knew what his youngest son had done to him. So he said, "Cursed be Canaan, the servant of servants. He shall be to his brothers." He also said, "Blessed be the Lord, the God of Shem. Let Canaan be his servant. May God enlarge Japheth, and let him dwell in the tents of Shem. And let Canaan be his servant." Now Noah lived 350 years after the flood, so all the days of Noah were 950 years, and he died. So Noah has these three sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. And Noah comes off the ark, and he plants this vineyard. And he becomes drunk. I think traditionally this has been kind of seen, I guess, as the only, sin of Noah. But in Genesis, as we've seen before, is that Genesis is very, by a pattern, they introduce us to things the first time it happens. In Genesis 4, when we're going through those genealogies, it talks about people who started to work with iron and bronze. And so it's possible that this could be the first vineyard that's ever actually been planted. And Noah has started that. So he may not have known. It's possible that he may not have known that he was going to, get drunk by, drinking this, what, turned out to be wine. So I don't think we should necessarily see this as his fault per se. I think there's reason to believe that it's not his fault. And of course, what happened to him is definitely not his fault. That's obvious, right? So, and speaking of that event, it's not super clear exactly what happens. There's some kind of Hebrew idioms used here, and so there's some debate on whether something happens to Noah or something happens to his wife. And so we don't really know, but Ham is the son who has done something that is sexually perverse. So it's probably better that we just know as much as we do. Who wants to know the details of this anyway? But what Noah does, and it's going to be kind of a pattern going forward as we see through the lives of the patriarchs, is the blessings of sons. And what's interesting about this, the blessings of sons, is that it seems almost like prophetic when you look at it in Genesis. And so it's almost as if like the father at this moment, which, this time it's not really near his death, but usually it is in Genesis. Patriarchs will gather their sons together before their death, and they will give blessings or maybe even curses. But these things come true. So there's something more to it than just, a father's prediction. It seems to be prophetic. And so what's interesting about it is that Noah curses Canaan, which at this time he doesn't have a son Canaan, unless possibly Ham's son Canaan is already born. But Ham's descendants become the people of Canaan. They also become the descendants of people of Egypt, and a lot of Israel's enemies and the rest of, Numbers and Deuteronomies come from the descendants of Ham. And so it's not really a surprise to the readers here that Ham has done something sexually perverse, because the Canaanites were a sexually perverse and corrupt culture. And so the people of God had to be blameless and separate from them because of this. So Canaan is cursed, and he's cursed with what Noah says, you will be a servant of servants. You shall be a servant to your own brothers. So now when he gets to Shem, Shem becomes the father of Heber, which is the Hebrews. And so that's where, of course, Jesus' lineage is going to come through. And notice the distinction between the blessing for Shem and the blessing for Japheth. So verse 26, blessed be the Lord, so that's the name of the Lord, the God of Shem, let Canaan be his servant, and may God enlarge Japheth, and let him dwell in the tents of Shem. Let Canaan be his servant. So Noah says, blessed be Yahweh, the God of Shem. So Noah is being prophetic in the sense that Shem has a relationship with God. He's going to have a special relationship specifically with the God who's caused this flood and who is restarting humanity. But with Japheth, it's not really specific. At least not the term for Lord is used. It just says, may God enlarge Japheth. So he gets a blessing too, but it doesn't really speak to his relationship with God. And Noah's blessing is kind of a play on words a little bit. The name Japheth means to enlarge. And so his territory enlarges. So what's the importance of Genesis 1 through 11? And this is without really looking at the Tower of Babel story, which is also important, which you'll get some insight for next week. So just kind of a summary recap, if you will. So Genesis 1 through 11 tells us the origin of mankind and its divine purpose. Despite the fall, God's nature remains unchanged. And through his covenant promises, mankind's corruption can be transformed into righteousness through faith, through that faith that seeks God. Evil's power and influence is strong, but when God's judgments come, there is no escape for evil, and the righteous that will ultimately be preserved. And so in that little nutshell of just the summary of Genesis 1 through 11, you really get a summary of what the Bible is about and the rest of the story. And so this small section of our Bible sets forth a divine spiritual pattern that's going to repeat over and over again. There's going to be nations that rise up, and they're going to be wicked, and they're going to bring all kinds of new evil into the world. But there's going to be people, individuals, who remain faithful, and God's judgment is going to come against those nations that are evil, but God's going to preserve his people, even when they are closely among the evil in their society, like Noah was. And so we're just going to see this pattern occur over and over again, is that God's able to save, and even though mankind becomes more wicked, God's nature doesn't change because his promises don't change. And God cannot lie. So that's all I got for tonight. Thank y'all for being a part of this, and thank you for the opportunity to be able to speak in an adult class. I enjoyed myself. And then, let's see, we might have a couple minutes if y'all have any questions about anything or anything you want to discuss about things we talked about or things you clarity on or things that I've said, then I can open up the floor if you have any questions or comments about what we talked about. No questions, Bob. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Oh, right. So if you couldn't hear Bob, Bob was talking about, when these things take place, this judgments of God. It's like people were living a long time and having a lot of descendants. So this was a huge population of people. It must have been. I have to agree with that. It wasn't just a few hundred people on the earth, but there was a lot of people. So, all right. Any other comments or questions? All right. Thank you guys. Appreciate it.
And find a seat and come on in. Good to see you, DP. Glad you're here this evening. All right, a few announcements that we want to share tonight. Some updates on our sick. We got a note. This is from Jill Bingham. Her aunt, Kate Tomerlin, was recently diagnosed with a brain tumor, and she's having surgery Friday to remove it. So the doctor suspects it's cancerous, and once pathology comes back, she'll most likely start radiation. So a scary moment, a lot of questions and things in there, but appreciate that being shared with us so we can lift that up in prayer. So we'll keep you updated further on that, but certainly special to have on our minds. We rejoice that a new grandbaby for the Andersons, for Ricky and Kathy Anderson, was born yesterday, Brody Cade Glover. And so Becca's in the hospital, and they'll be going home hopefully soon, so we rejoice in that along with them. I know they're excited. A few activities that we have that are coming up. One, we have the Teachers Appreciation Lunch. You need to sign up for that. The last day to sign up is going to be this Sunday. We sent out a couple of times an email with that link, so make sure you put on there your family and how many are coming so that we can order food and have that ready for everybody. And that's going to be on May, I have it on a different note, somebody confirm me on that one. 7th, thank you very much. All right, on May 7th, and so the last sign up is April 23rd. Swap notes, now I got it. All right, this Thursday is going to be the study at Brantwood Children's Home. If you want to participate with that, you can see Keith Willingham or Jeremy Pate. Friday evening, the Silver Saints are going to have their supper, country music, and fellowship at 6:30. That's going to be here at our church building. This Sunday, April 23rd, there's going to be a baby girl shower honoring Anna Hatcher Aubrey, and this is going to be from 1 to 2:30. And then we'll also have our Sunday evening activity. We're going to do what we're calling a time to teach, and we're going to work through a study talking about instrumental music and having a better understanding of that so that we can teach others more adequately. And so that's going to be a good opportunity for us to study together. And we'll do another big push for April 30th, Family Day. We have some things online for you to share with people. That seems to be a good avenue there. But I also want to remind you, if you want a good personal challenge, the elders have asked us to take this paper. We got copies up here, and we send them around in our Bible classes for you to make a list of 5 people that you want to invite. So this is going to put the challenge there for you to go invite them. So you'll have it in front of you as a reminder. It's going to be a very special day for us to focus on family, have a lot of things going to be happening along with a fellowship lunch. And then a panel discussion in the afternoon and great lessons throughout the day, but a great time for the church to be together. So that's April 30th coming up next week. I believe that's all the announcements that I have written down. If there's anything that we've missed, please let us know, and we'll get that out as quickly as possible. At this time, we'll now have our devotional together.
If you'd like to mark number 76 for our song after the devotional, 76. And before, let's sing 797. 797. Lord, we come before thee now, at thy feet we humbly bow. Oh, do not us to this day shall we seek thee, Lord, in vain. Shall we seek thee?
got your Bibles, go ahead and be turning to Matthew chapter 15. We'll be reading through this just a little bit and talking about it, so I need you to be reading it with me, or it won't be as helpful for you. I've begun using these forums to pretty much just nerd out about whatever I have been studying, and so this is about to be what's happening. In Matthew chapter 15, verses 21 through 28, there's an instance that I find to be very interesting, and without it being studied, it could be really confusing as to the nature of Jesus and what that means for us. But if you really study it and begin to understand it, then I think we can learn something very interesting from this instance. In Matthew chapter 15, we're beginning in verse 21. Jesus went away from there where he was. He went away and withdrew into the district of Tyre and Sidon. So as I go, I'm going to stop a lot. So just letting you know now. Here in verse 21, he goes to this district of Tyre and Sidon. This is not where a lot of Jews are going to reside. In fact, in Matthew chapter 11, toward the end of it, he's getting on to some people that are rejecting Jesus and who also rejected John the Baptist. And he says, if I did what I'm doing now, in these places, Tyre and Sidon, even they would respond. And even they would repent because they would recognize my greatness. And that was kind of a note, I guess, toward how unresponsive, historically unresponsive and bad this place, Tyre and Sidon, these places are. And so this is where he's traveling to. Predominantly Gentiles here in Tyre and Sidon. So in verse 22, and a Canaanite woman from that region came out and began to cry out, saying, have mercy on me, Lord, son of David. My daughter is cruelly demon-possessed. So we see this woman who is not a Jew. It says that she came out from that region. And so she has heard about Jesus and traveled to meet Jesus. And she began to cry out to him, Lord, son of David. And this is a Jewish thing. To be a son of David, this is like what Jews would know Jesus by. And so this Gentile woman is saying, Lord, son of David, my daughter is cruelly demon-possessed. So there's a realization here that this woman is making. And that realization is that her daughter can be saved because of Jesus' power. There's a faith that we see that is already present in this woman who's not a Jew. So Jesus' response, verse 23, but he did not answer her a word. And his disciples came and implored him, saying, send her away because she keeps shouting at us. So I find it interesting, one, that Jesus didn't answer. And we'll get an explanation for that here in just a second. But it also says that the disciples came to Jesus and said to send her away because she's shouting at us. You don't think that 12 grown men could have just moved this woman aside? Just been like, okay, I've heard enough. Please stop yelling in our faces. Can you please move? There's so many things that could have been done, but instead they kind of go to Jesus almost like hey, can you just do what she's asking? Can you just do this and then she can just leave? That would be really helpful, so not be shouting in our ears. That'd be really nice. And so we see Jesus' response in verse 24. But he answered and said, I was sent only to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. Well, it makes me question when I read it. I was like, whoa, I thought Jesus was for everybody here. But if you read it with going along with what Jesus' mission is and what he's doing, Jesus is the Messiah to Israel in this very moment. All of the Old Testament prophecies that he's been fulfilling and that Matthew has been harping on because he's writing to Jews, all of these prophecies that he's been doing has been in the Old Law, written to Jews, written to the Old, it's in the Old Testament, things that Jews would know, but Gentiles may not. And so he says, I was sent only to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. So he doesn't necessarily say this woman's not a lost sheep. He recognizes it. But he says, I am only for the house of Israel right now. And of course we see later on that the blood of Jesus cleanses everybody. And we see later on that people who are Gentiles are added to the church. And so by no means is Jesus saying my blood and the forgiveness of sins is not for everybody. But what Jesus is saying is right now, I am for the house of Israel. But she came and began to bow down before him, verse 25, saying, Lord, help me. So she's already been rejected once. Jesus didn't respond to her. And so she comes again. His disciples are like, can you just do what she asked? She comes again to Jesus and says, Lord, help me. And Jesus says, it is not good to take the children's bread and throw it to the dogs. And this sounds harsh, but what he's saying is, I'm here for Israel. And Israel are sitting at the table. They're my children. And so the food that I have on this table are for them, the ones sitting at the table. It's not for the dogs that are running around. But she said, yes, note, that's I might be a little offended. That might be the time when I stop And I'm like, okay, I get it, Jesus. Like, I understand. She says, yes, Lord, but even the dogs feed on the crumbs which fall from their master's table. And this woman is persistent. Like, she's been told no. She's been ignored, and she's been told no. And yet she still is going to Jesus, and she's begging Jesus, yes, I know that you're here for Israel, but even the breadcrumbs that fall off the table, I can still eat it, even as a dog. I can still eat these breadcrumbs. So Jesus says, "O woman, your faith is great. It shall be done for you as you wish." And her daughter was healed at once. This is not the first time that Jesus has come into contact with a Gentile. We see it just a few chapters earlier. This is not contrary to Jesus to be in the presence of a Gentile, but it was simply against his mission. However, what we see, even though that Jesus said no and ignored her, she's so persistent. Her faith is so great. She realizes how desperately she needs Jesus that Jesus says, "Oh, woman, your faith is great. Let me do what you're asking. Let me heal your daughter and get the demon that is in her out." And this is, there's something that you can learn from everything. There's probably a few different things that we could learn from this passage. You could talk about no matter who you are, that Jesus saves. And this is a woman, she's not a Jew, and she's in desperate need of Jesus' power. She realizes that Jesus is her only solution. Jesus is the only person that can help her at this time. There is no other doctors or a priest or anything that can help her with her daughter. Jesus is the only one that she has. And so she travels out to see Jesus. She's begging Jesus. Her faith is great. She knows the power of Jesus and that he can save. And so we can take from that, it doesn't matter who you are, what your background is, Jesus can save. We could take that. And we could probably take a couple of other things from this passage and learn from this. But I think one of the key things, at least the number one thing that stood out to me, is her persistence. I would think that it was kind of rude after Jesus has already said no to continue on. Like, I would think, wow, all right, I'm not going to question the Son of God, the Son of the living God. I'm not going to be the one to keep asking and to keep begging. But Jesus is not offended when she stops, when she continues on. Jesus isn't offended by this continuing and this persistence. In fact, he's kind of impressed. He says, wow, your faith is great. And Matthew often ties a great faith to the miracles of Jesus. And he says, your faith is great. Your daughter is healed. And so I think what we can learn from this is the importance of being persistent, not disrespectfully, but with boldness. In prayer, how persistent are you? Are you praying often for the things that you really want, the things that you really need in your life, that you really want God to act, the way that you want him to act, the way, the parts of your life that you want him to be a part of? Are you praying about that consistently, all of the time? Are you being persistent in your prayers and having faith that God can actually do it, that God can save, that whatever it is that you need, that God can do it, that he can be a part of your life in that way? Are you persistent in that? You know, the end of Hebrews chapter 4 talks about us going to the throne of grace and mercy with boldness. It doesn't say to come gently and to say, and to preface with your position. It says you're going to the throne with boldness. And you're going to God. Jesus is coming to God for you, and he hears your words. You're to go boldly, persistently, all of the time. I think that's something that we can learn from this. This woman's persistence and her great faith is what ultimately led Jesus to be willing to save her daughter. Tonight, if you have a need of any kind, if you have not experienced the forgiveness, this great saving power of Jesus, then you need to be baptized. You need to be a part of his death and raised anew, Romans 6. If you have been struggling with anything in your walk and you need the prayers of this congregation, then as we sing this song, I ask that you come forward as we stand and we'll sing together.
O Lord my God, when
Just as I am without one plea, but that thy blood was shed for me, and that thou bidst me come to thee, O Lamb
Let's all pray together. Father God, we come before you thankful for another day and the breath of life, another opportunity to come together as your people and worship and learn more about you. We ask that you be with us, help us be persistent in pursuing your Son, the one who saves us, and it's through his name that we pray all things. Amen.